The engineering bay on the fourth floor of Meridian Construction Group's headquarters was empty at 3:52 in the morning, the way it was supposed to be. Shane Koller knew this building the way some men know a particular stretch of highway they have driven so many times it becomes automatic. The motion sensor light near the east stairwell that always glitched in cold weather, the third-floor conference room door that stuck in its frame unless you lifted the handle slightly, the particular way the HVAC cycled down between 3 and 4 a.m. so the whole floor held its breath in the dark. He had worked overnight security here for 2 years. He knew every room by its smell and its silence. What no one at Meridian had ever considered was that he also knew structural engineering. The drawing had slipped from the wheeled transport cart near the shredder and landed face-up on the tile floor, the way things did when a cart moved too fast around a corner. Shane bent to pick it up without thinking. It was the kind of reflex his job had built into him, the quiet maintenance of order that kept his rounds on schedule and his badge swiped on time. He meant to set it back on the cart. His eyes caught the figures in the lower right corner of the sheet, and his hands stopped. Soil-bearing capacity, 1,500 pounds per square foot. He read it twice, then again, not because he misread it, but because the number was so wrong it needed more than one pass to fully arrive. His heartbeat slowed in the way it always did when something felt geometrically off. Not panic, but the particular stillness of a mind that has learned to pull focus instead of noise. He knew that address. Midtown Atlanta, 4 blocks from Peachtree and 10th. He had worked a commercial structure at that intersection 12 years ago, a 7-story mixed-use development that had taken 14 months and 2 rounds of revised foundation specs because the soil profile in that corridor was notoriously soft, alluvial deposits, low plasticity clay that didn't behave the way you wanted it to. The bearing capacity in that district ranged from 4,200 to 4,400 pounds per square foot at standard depths, and that was on a good day, and you did not build on the high end of that range without deep caisson work to anchor past the problem layer. There was no deep foundation spec anywhere on this drawing. He stood very still in the empty engineering bay, holding a structural sheet for what appeared to be a major high-rise project, with a soil figure that made the entire load calculation quietly, catastrophically wrong. He set it back on the cart, he finished his rounds, he drove home in the dark. He did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with coffee that went cold while the sky outside the window changed from black to gray to the particular pale blue of an October morning in Georgia. Upstairs, Noah's alarm went off at 6:40. He heard the familiar sequence, footsteps across the hall, the bathroom tap, the specific dragging sound of Noah's backpack being pulled off its hook by the door. When his son appeared at the bottom of the stairs, 9 years old and sharp-eyed in the way children become when they have grown up alongside a parent who carries weight quietly, he stopped on the last step and looked at his father without pretending not to notice. "You didn't sleep," Noah said. "Had a long night," Shane said. Noah sat across from him and ate cereal without pushing it further, which was one of the things about his son that sometimes caught Shane off guard even now. That patience, that learned grace. Noah had figured out at 6, without being taught, that there were mornings when his father needed room, and he had chosen, quietly and without complaint, to give it. Carla would have known exactly what to do with a morning like this. She had always known. But Carla had been gone for 3 years, and Shane had long since stopped expecting grief to announce itself in proportion to the situation. It arrived in sideways moments, in a 9-year-old's patience, in the sound of a backpack being packed by one set of hands instead of 2. He drove Noah to school and watched him walk through the double doors. Then he drove back downtown. The lobby of Meridian Construction Group looked nothing like itself at 8 a.m. At midnight, it was marble and still air and the low hum of a building thinking. At 8 a.m., it was badges and briefcases and the smell of someone's breakfast sandwich near the elevator bank. Shane walked in wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a button-down he had ironed the previous Sunday, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. He almost turned around on the 3rd-floor landing. He almost turned around again at the top of the stairs. Both times, the number on that drawing surfaced in his mind with the quiet insistence of something that would not be set aside, and he kept walking. The 6th-floor conference room was visible through the glass wall from the elevator lobby. Meredith Yates sat at the head of the long table in a charcoal blazer, a thick contract binder open in front of her. 2 attorneys flanked her side. Across from them, the representatives from Coastal Pacific Group. The development firm Meridian was closing a $180 million construction contract with this morning, had spread their own documents and were checking their phones with the impatience of people whose flight home was at 2. Glenn Parrish stood near the windows. Shane recognized him from late evenings when the VP of Projects stayed past 7, and from one specific night 3 weeks ago when Shane had done his 11 p.m. floor check and found Parrish alone in the engineering bay near the transport cart, doing something Shane had not been close enough to see clearly and had not thought to question. At the time, he had assumed overtime. Gray suit today, silver cufflinks. The posture of a man who had never once walked into a room and felt uncertain he belonged there. Shane pushed open the glass door. The silence that dropped over the room had weight to it. The particular silence of people whose morning had a fixed outcome and who could not immediately process an interruption. Meredith looked at him with measured attention. "Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to interrupt." Shane kept his voice level. He could feel his pulse in the column of his throat. "My name is Shane Koller. I work overnight security here. I need to talk to you about the structural drawings for the Midtown project before you sign anything." One of the attorneys sat back slightly. Glenn Parrish's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did, something small and fast that Shane caught and filed. "Security routes concerns through facilities," Glenn said, his tone measured and dismissive in equal measure. "If there's a building issue, we can address it after the meeting. There's a soil-bearing figure on your structural drawings that doesn't match the geological profile for the site address," Shane said. He was not performing calm. He was just calm because the math was either right or it wasn't, and he had not driven back downtown to argue. If that number is wrong, the load distribution for the entire foundation is wrong. Glenn laughed once, short, deliberate, designed to redirect the room's energy without making a scene. Ms. Yates, I think we can acknowledge the concern and continue. Our structural package was reviewed through 2 full engineering cycles by qualified." "What's the figure?" Meredith asked. She had not taken her eyes off Shane. £5,800 per square foot, Shane said. "The Midtown corridor I'm familiar with runs 200 to 1,400 at standard depth without specialty foundation work. I don't see caisson specs on the drawing." "That is what the geotech report shows," Glenn said immediately. "Then the geotech report is wrong." The room went still differently than before. One of the Coastal Pacific representatives looked at the other. The attorneys stopped writing. Meredith reached for her reading glasses and put them on. "Pull the original geotechnical survey," she said to no one in particular, the one submitted with the initial permit application. "Meredith," Glenn's voice had shifted register now, not quite patience anymore. "We have clients at this table and a closing scheduled, 2 full engineering review cycles." "Take 5 minutes," she said. She looked toward the hallway where a junior engineer named Keisha had materialized in the doorway, drawn by the shift in the room's atmosphere. "Keisha, original geotech for the Midtown parcel, right now." Keisha disappeared. Glenn spoke for the next 4 minutes. Long sentences, confident architecture, each clause building toward the conclusion that delay was the real risk here, that revisiting approved documentation mid-closing created liability exposure, that his team's credentials were unimpeachable, and the question of a night security guard's soil knowledge was not the appropriate lens through which to evaluate 6 months of engineering review. He was good at it. Shane had seen men like Glenn in conference rooms before. Men who had learned that confidence delivered at volume and speed could function as its own kind of evidence. Shane stood near the door and said nothing. The math either held or it didn't. Keisha returned with a laptop and set it open at the end of the table, screen turned toward the room. The original geotechnical survey for the Midtown parcel, submitted 19 months ago, stamped by a licensed geotechnical engineering firm. Soil-bearing capacity at proposed foundation depth, 1,380 pounds per square foot, maximum without specialty work, once in 410. Nobody spoke. One of the Coastal Pacific attorneys leaned forward slowly. "The structural package submitted to our office last month shows feet 800. "That matches what Glenn's department filed for the structural permit," Keisha said, then seemed to register that she had said it directly in front of the VP of Projects and went very still. Meredith turned toward Glenn. He had not broken, but the outer structure of his expression had thinned in a way that was visible if you were paying attention. There was a supplemental analysis commissioned after the original survey. Updated figures from an independent firm. It supersedes the original. "Which firm?" Meredith asked. "Harlan Geotechnical. Are they on our approved vendor list?" A pause, half a second, but in a room full of people trained to read timing, it hit like a weight dropped on a quiet floor. "That would need to be confirmed," Glenn said. Keisha checked. "They're not in the system." Shane looked at the figures again and then at the full structural drawing now spread across the far end of the table. He had noticed something else during the 4 minutes Glenn was talking. Something he had not mentioned yet, because he wanted the soil figure confirmed first. He stepped forward. "There's a second problem," he said. He pointed to the seismic load column. "This design uses Zone 1 calculations. Atlanta sits in seismic Zone 2. The load factor is low by roughly 15%. Combined with the soil discrepancy, the building's structural tolerance for a moderate seismic event is significantly below what the site conditions require." Keisha pulled up the USGS seismic zoning map on her laptop and turned it toward the table without being asked. Zone 2, clear and unambiguous. The lead coastal Pacific representative stood up, not dramatically, just with the deliberate care of a man who has decided he is no longer in a safe place. "We need to pause the closing." "This is a," Glenn began. "Sit down." Meredith's voice had changed, still quiet, still controlled, but the CEO she had been for the past 10 years had replaced whatever version of her had been prepared to sign a contract this morning. "Sit down, Glenn. Do not speak without legal counsel present." Glenn did not sit, but he stopped talking, which was the same thing at that point. Legal counsel arrived within 20 minutes. A forensic engineering firm was reached and had 2 representatives on site by 10. Meredith asked Keisha to pull the full document chain for the Midtown structural package: submission logs, revision histories, authorization signatures. Shane sat near the wall because Meredith had told him to stay, and because he genuinely had no idea where he was supposed to stand after saying what he had said. The document trail came apart methodically, with the quiet inevitability of things that were always going to come apart once someone looked at the right junction. The original structural drawings, dated 16 months ago, bearing the correct soil figures and proper seismic load factors, existed in the archive under a version stamp labeled Final. A subsequent revision had replaced those figures. The revision had been authored under the login credentials of a junior engineer who had left Meridian 8 months prior. The authorization approval carried Glenn Parrish's digital signature. Harlan Geotechnical, the independent firm Glenn had cited, shared a registered agent address with a limited liability company that had received 7 consulting disbursements from a Meridian subsidiary account over the past 14 months. Total paid out $380,000. No deliverables on record. By the time that detail landed in the room, Glenn had stopped trying to construct explanations. He sat with his hands flat on the table in the posture of a man doing arithmetic with no good result available. Shane watched it happen from near the wall, not with satisfaction, with something more like the specific exhaustion of seeing a thing confirmed that he had not wanted to be true. A building in downtown Atlanta. Load calculations designed to look adequate while being anything but. A false survey commissioned to paper over the gap. Someone who had decided that the math was close enough and that no one who would notice was ever going to be in the room. He thought about the drawing on the tile floor at 3:52 in the morning, face up, waiting. He had almost set it back on the cart without reading it. "How did you know?" Meredith asked. She had come to stand near him during a pause in the document review, speaking quietly enough that it was only for him. "I used to do this work," Shane said. She waited. "Structural systems, Georgia Tech graduate program, then 12 years at a firm called Draper and Hollis before I left." "Why did you leave?" He looked at the screens across the room, not avoiding the question, just deciding how much the answer needed. "My wife died, cancer. My son was 6. He needed someone present during the day. Structural engineering doesn't accommodate that, not the way I needed it to." The room was not entirely quiet. Keyboards, low voices, the sound of documents being sorted, but the people within earshot had stopped making noise. "So you took overnight security," Meredith said. "It kept the rent paid and let me be home for school pickup." He paused. "And honestly, I liked knowing the buildings I was watching. Liked knowing what held them up." She looked at him for a moment in the way people look at something that requires a longer frame than the one available. Then she returned to the documents. The Coastal Pacific closing was formally suspended at 1:15 p.m. Glenn Parrish was escorted from the building by Meridian's head of security, a man named Burke who had worked overnight rotations alongside Shane for 18 months and who, passing Shane in the hallway, gave him a look that contained something between disbelief and the particular respect people offer when they run out of other things to give. The forensic engineers submitted a preliminary assessment by 3 o'clock. The structural package, as falsified, would have produced a building with a foundation tolerance roughly 23% below the minimum required for the site's actual soil and seismic conditions. Whether the building would have failed in 5 years or 15 or only after a significant ground event was a question the simulation models could not answer precisely. The point was that the margin between acceptable and catastrophic had been quietly erased, and no one whose name was not Shane Koller's had been in a position to see it. The empty conference room where Shane sat after most people had filed out felt very large. He thought about Noah's PT appointment at 4:15. He thought about the school lunch account. He thought about the folder Meredith had said she would bring when things settled, and whether he was the kind of person who still knew how to want the thing that folder contained. Meredith came in and sat across from him without preamble. She set a folder on the table between them, Director of Structural Integrity. The position has been open for 4 months. We interviewed 14 candidates. None of them were wrong, exactly, but none of them were right. Shane looked at the folder without reaching for it. I know what's coming next, Meredith said, and I want you to say all of it before I respond. He thought for a moment. My son has PT appointments Tuesday and Thursday at 4. I don't cancel those. Understood. If his school calls, I leave. That's not negotiable, and it has never been negotiable. It won't be. And before I look at anything for myself, he chose the next words the way he had always chosen load specifications, deliberately, with the weight already calculated. You have 16 people in overnight facilities and security. 4 of them are single parents. The benefit structure for that tier hasn't been updated in 5 years. I've seen what they're working on. That gets fixed first, before my title appears on anything. Meredith looked at him without blinking. You negotiate, she said quietly, like someone who knows exactly what surviving actually costs. I do, he said. She held his gaze. Done, all of it. HR meets with facilities management tomorrow morning, and you have my word that meeting produces something real. She slid the folder 1 inch closer. Now will you look at it? He pulled it toward him. Open to the first page, read the position description and the salary range printed in plain black type, and set it back down. I'll think about it tonight, he said. I'll have an answer in the morning. That's all I'm asking. He picked Noah up at 3:35 early enough that his was the 3rd car in the carpool lane, which almost never happened. Noah came through the double doors and spotted the car and stopped for just a moment, long enough that Shane could see him register it, the unexpectedness of his father being there before the line had even formed. He got in, buckled his seatbelt, looked out the window at the afternoon, which was clear and ordinary and asking nothing from either of them. You still didn't sleep last night, Noah said. No. But you fixed it. Shane pulled out of the lot and onto the main road. Afternoon light came through the windshield at a low, even angle, the kind of October light that makes everything look like it might be okay for a little while. Something like that, he said. Noah turned to look at him directly, the way he had started doing in the past year, that specific, patient attention that belonged to his mother and had found its way into him without anyone teaching it. You always say that. Yeah, Shane said. I do. They rode for half a block in silence. Shane reached over and turned up the heat on Noah's side. He thought about a drawing on a tile floor in the dark. He thought about a woman who had asked what it cost to survive and had listened when he answered. He thought about 16 people in overnight shifts who would go to an HR meeting tomorrow morning and come out with something better than what they had walked in with. He thought about Carla, who had believed with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who simply paid attention that his work with load tolerances and soil profiles and the invisible mathematics of structures mattered, not because of what it paid or what it was called, but because buildings were where people lived their actual lives, and someone had to be honest about whether they held. He had not stopped believing that either. He had just been standing in a different room. You've got PT in 30 minutes, he said. I know, Dad. We're going to make it on time today. Noah looked back out the window. After a moment, very quietly, we always make it. Shane glanced at him. Outside the car, the city moved past them the way cities do. Continuous and indifferent, glass towers and cranes and ordinary people moving from one place to the next, trusting without thinking about it that the ground beneath them was solid, that someone somewhere had done the math and told the truth. Shane drove his son to physical therapy. He sat in the waiting room the whole time, the folder from Meredith Yates tucked under his arm, unopened for now. Some answers could wait until morning.